First day I brought him home, I left him for a minute. Just a minute, so I could get some food. When I got back, I couldn't find him. He'd crawled into my backpack and fallen asleep. It had the word Pacton sewn on the label. I was 7 then, and I figured, Pacton, that's a good name. It had an X in it, like Fox, you know? But now what? Now he's all alone because of the war. I let him go because of a war. War, not peace. What's that called? Irony? Whatever. Now it's a terrible name. He'll probably die because of a war. Maybe yes, maybe no. He could survive. It's spring. Plenty of food, I think. Peter shook his head. Foxes teach their kits to hunt when they're about 8 weeks old. I found him way before that. He was maybe 2 weeks old, the vet figured. He could run across a dozen mice sitting on little plates, and he probably couldn't catch them. All he's ever had is kibble and the scraps I had let him swipe. Well, what kinds of scraps? Anything he'd find out there? Peter shrugged. He's crazy for peanut butter. He likes hot dogs, loves eggs. No, unless he stumbles into someone's picnic, he'll starve. He'll find water, I figure, and he can probably go a week without food. But after that... Peter dropped his head to his hands. I let it happen. I didn't choose any of it, but I didn't fight it either. I don't know why I didn't fight it. Except, of course, he did know. When his father had first dropped the order about packs, Peter had steeled himself and said, No, I won't do it. But his father's eyes had flared with that flash-fire anger, and his fist had jerked up, stopping only at the last split second to knuckle Peter's cheek in a gesture that carried enough heat to set Pax on a growling alert. Peter's own fist had come up, and the rage he felt at his father had scared him more than the threat itself. He heard his grandfather's words now. Our apples don't fall far from the tree. And he felt sick and afraid all over again. He dropped his gaze to the worn pine table to hide the shameful headline he felt burning across his face. Fuller reached over and cupped the top of his head with both hands. Peter froze. Except for an occasional "attaboy" shoulder shake from his father, or a casual arm punch from one of his friends, no one had touched him since his mother. Vola paused, as though she knew he needed time. Then she pressed down firmly. It was a strange thing to do, but Peter didn't pull away. Didn't move a muscle, didn't even draw a breath, because at that moment, her strong grip was the only thing keeping him from flying apart. Well, that's over now, she said. Isn't it? She rose. I may not have your answers, boy, but I do know one true thing about you. You need food. A lot of food. You're 12, you slept out in the cold, and you've got a bone to heal. I'm going to set that bone now, then I'm going to start cooking, and you're going to start eating, and neither one of us is going to stop until you say so. Got it? Peter's belly was suddenly a hollow, snarling crater. Yes, ma'am, I've got it. Vola rummaged under the sink and drew out a sack of plaster. Peter watched her sift some into the bucket and then pumped in some water. Then she brought it over the thing she'd been sewing. Foot up. Vola propped a pillow under his knee and worked a quilted sleeve over his leg, like an open-toed sock. He recognized the yellow checkered material. He glanced into the bedroom to be sure. You cut up your quilt? I can always make another one. You need the cushioning. She took another section of quilt and stripped off the batting, then ripped the yellow calico into strips and dunked them into plaster. Hold your foot at a 90-degree angle. Around and around his foot and ankle, halfway up his shin, she wrapped the strips. When she built the thick boot, she frosted it with plaster. Don't move, not even your toes. Vola left for the porch and came back with her arms full. She set 2 iron skillets on the burners, flipped a hunk of butter into each, and turned on the flames. She cracked a couple of eggs into a yellow bowl and started whisking into the milk, then cornmeal. A cool breeze, fragrant with turned earth and frying butter, lifted against Peter. He looked at the sturdy cast drying, his foot safe inside now, wrapped in what used to be Viola's quilt. I'm sorry about how I've been. He tipped his head to her bulletin board. My philosophy bingo cards? She said with a nod. No bat, Peter. Those are just things I figure to be true about the world. The universals. The important ones are the things I figure out to be true about me. I keep them somewhere else. Private. How come? How come they're important ones, or how come they're private? Peter shrugged. Either, both. He leaned back, waiting. Vola eyed him as she sawed a slice of ham joint and forked it into the frying pans. She dipped out 3 ladles of batter, poured them sputtering into the other pan, and then set the bowl down. I'm going to tell you a story. When I got out of the service, I didn't remember a single true thing about myself. That's what the training does. No more individuals, just pieces they can mold into their machine. I was lost my first day as a civilian. Lost. I went into a grocery store. I stared at all the choices. I kept wondering who I was supposed to be buying groceries for. What filled this person's hungry belly? Gumbo or pie? Beans or bread? In the produce aisle, I broke down because I didn't remember a single thing about myself. Fola went quiet then, her eyes closed. What happened? Peter nudged after a moment. What happened? In the store. What happened in the store? Oh, she turned back to the stove and flipped the Johnny cakes. Peanut butter? Peanut butter happened? Vola tossed her hands into the air. Peanut butter happened. And I was lucky it did. There I was on the floor of the grocery store. Dirty, red and white checkered linoleum. I'll never forget. Weeping. And I knew I wouldn't get up till I remembered what kind of food I liked. Vola stacked the Johnny cakes on a blue plate, then paused. Peter thought she might be drifting back to the memory of that grocery store floor. He was glad he hadn't seen something like that. A grown woman sobbing on the dirty grocery floor? A crazy lady with one lost leg? He felt suddenly protective and hoped no one had laughed at her and that she'd gotten herself out okay. And? Oh, and finally I did. I remembered my grandmother telling me that when I first discovered peanut butter sandwiches, I wanted one every day. So I got up from the floor and I bought myself some peanut butter and bread. I filled my cart with peanut butter and bread because I decided I wasn't coming back until I knew for sure something else I'd like to eat, and I was afraid that might be a long time. She added the ham to the plate, slapped on a scoop of applesauce, and brought it over to him along with a white pitcher of maple syrup. Eat. Peter flooded the plate with syrup and loaded a fork. The cornmeal had a gritty crunch. The ham was smooth and salty against the sweet syrup. It was the best food he could remember eating. When was it? He asked when he'd cleaned half the plate. A long time before you remembered something else? Vola pressed a finger to the drying cast. Almost set. Keep still a while longer. She went back to the stove and carved more ham and ladled more batter into the skillet. It was. People around me, they called it PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, from being in the war. And they were right that I was sick. But I knew it wasn't being in the war exactly. It was that in the war, I had forgotten everything that was true about myself. Post-traumatic, forgetting who you are disorder. That's what I had. My grandfather was in a nursing home by then, and he was dying. I went out to his place. It had been my old home, too. My grandparents raised me for a couple of years to clean it out. It was the end of the summer. The orchard was an untended mess, but there were still some peaches hanging on. And that was the second lucky thing that happened to me after peanut butter. Because I suddenly remembered. Lord, I'd loved those peaches. I used to sneak in the middle of the night to pick them. I'd sprawl on the grass underneath those trees with fireflies flashing all around the katydids singing, a heap of peaches on my belly, and I'd eat them till the juice ran into my ears. I remember that so clearly. I could smell the memory. I could hear it. I could taste it. But I couldn't figure out how that girl could be the same person who put on a uniform, picked up a gun, and done those things I did in the war. So I reached up and picked one of those peaches, and I laid myself down on the grass and bit into it, and there I was. I found another little true piece of my old self. She brought the skillet over and stacked more Johnny cakes and ham onto his empty plate, then went back to the stove. Stop, Peter said. Stop? Well, that's the end of the story anyway. No, I mean, this food will be enough. Enough food. Thank you. Peter wished again that his fox were under the table, wondered again if Pax was hungry, and then had the curious sense that he wasn't, that tonight at least, Pax had food in his belly. So then what? He asked after loading his fork. You were okay? Bola set the skillet in the sink and came back to sit across